in the fall of 1889, on the sandhills north of Sparrow Bluff, Nebraska, a 44-year-old harness maker named Ezra Dunmore paid $60 for a quarter section of ground the whole county had already agreed was dead. He did it on the courthouse steps in front of 11 men who laughed, and he did not explain himself to any of them. What nobody in Sparrow Bluff knew was that, before the first blizzard of that winter finished blowing, a blind mare would come up out of the storm, walk past Ezra's door without stopping, and stand in a bare patch of sand where nothing had grown in 2 years. And they did not know that Lorna Ashby, a young woman the town had already decided was a thief, was the only living person who understood why. This is their story. It is about what a place is worth, and about the things a living creature refuses to forget. The auction was held the second Tuesday of October, and the wind came up out of the northwest that morning like it had business to finish. Ezra stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps with his hat in his hand. He was a big man gone lean, with a stitcher's shoulders and forearms marked pale, where the awl had slipped over the years. He had not spoken to more than 5 people since spring, and 4 of those had been customers. The county treasurer read the delinquent list in a flat voice. Most of it was town lots. Then he came to the northwest quarter of Section 9, and the crowd made a sound like a man exhaling. 160 acres, the treasurer said. Taxes owed $52 and change. Nobody moved. Anybody. A young hand named Toby Rusk was sitting on the rail with his boots swinging. He was 19 and he had an audience, which is a dangerous thing for a boy that age. "Give it to the coyotes," Toby said. "They already own it." Men laughed. Ezra kept his eyes on the treasurer. "I'll say 60, Ezra said. The laughter cut off, then started again, different. Somebody said his name like it was a joke he hadn't been told. Toby said loud, $60 for a hole in the ground with sand in it. Ezra did not turn around. Across the street, standing under the awning of the feed store, a man in a good gray coat lifted his chin. Vernon Prentice had come to town in a buggy that morning, and he had a lawyer with him, and everybody had assumed he meant to bid. He didn't. He watched. He watched the way a man watches a fence he means to move later. "Sold," the treasurer said, "for $60 to Ezra Dunmore." The clerk carried the paperwork inside. The courthouse smelled like cold iron and floor wax. Ezra counted out the money in silver, and the clerk counted it again, and then a third time, as though a mistake might still save him. "You know what's on that quarter," the clerk said. "Sand," Ezra said. "Yucca. Some bluestem in the draws. There's no water within 4 miles of it." The clerk lowered his voice. "There was a well once. Temperance Ivy had a well. It quit. Wells quit. That one quit all at once." The clerk looked at the door, then back. "Widow died in 88. Land's been standing empty. Folks say it's spoiled ground." Ezra took the pen. It was cold, and the ink was cold, and he wrote his name slowly the way he wrote it on a bill of sale, pressing hard, because his hand had learned long ago that a light stroke doesn't hold. The clerk blotted the ink and pushed the deed across the counter. He did not wish Ezra luck. The dugout on the north slope had been Temperance Ivy's, and it had held up better than the house. Ezra dug out the drifted sand with a coal shovel, replaced 2 of the rotted cedar posts, and slept in it the first night with his coat on and the door open a hand's width so he could hear. The wind on the sand hills does not blow. It works. It puts a shoulder into the grass and leans. He had brought a mule named Copperhead, a stitching's horse, a box of awls and edge tools, 1 crate of books that had been his wife's, 40 pounds of beans, and a rifle he had never fired at anything he had not intended to eat. He had also brought a brass thimble. It sat in his vest pocket, and he took it out that first night and held it near the lamp. Marietta had worn it 13 years. The crown of it was worn clean through in one place, a little window of light no bigger than a pinhead. And she had kept using it anyway. She used to say the hole let her know which way was up. She had taught school in a sod schoolhouse 8 miles east of town. On the 12th of January in 88, the day came up warm enough that children walked to school in shirt sleeves, and by 2 in the afternoon the sky went the color of a dirty nickel, and the temperature fell 40 degrees inside an hour. She kept 17 children alive in that soddy for 2 nights, by burning the desks and the floor and finally the school books. On the 3rd morning the sky cleared and she went out to walk for help because the children needed water, and she was the strongest thing in that building. They found her 1.5 miles from the kettle place, sitting down facing east. Ezra had been in Sparrow Bluff that whole time, sewing a britchin strap for a freighter, with a stove at his back. He set the thimble on the crate beside the lamp and looked at it. "I wasn't there," he said. He said it out loud, to nobody, the way a man will, and the wind took it away and did not bring anything back. He worked. That's what he had instead of an answer. He walked the fence lines that weren't fence lines anymore, 4 strands of wire lying in the grass like something shed. He found the foundation of the ivy house, 12 feet by 16, and a cellar hole full of tumbleweed. He found the chokecherry break in the draw, and a badger hole, and the print of a coyote that had come to look at him while he slept. And in the middle of the flat below the slope, where the grass should have been thickest, he found a place where nothing grew at all. It was maybe 30 feet across. Under the sand it was not the sand, it was rock, not the soft chalky stuff, but broken limestone and granite fieldstone, tumbled together, the edges still sharp. That was the strange part. Sharp edges. Stone that has lain in the sand hills 100 years is round. It is worn soft the way a bar of soap is worn soft. This stone had corners on it. Ezra crouched and turned a piece over in his hand and did not know yet what he was looking at. He set it back exactly the way it had been lying, because he was the kind of man who put things back, and he stood up and looked at the empty flat and the empty sky. He had $60 less than he'd had in October, and no water, and no reason, and Ezra stayed. The blizzard came on the 9th of December, out of the north, and it came fast. Ezra got Copperhead into the lean-to and stretched a rope from the lean-to door to the dugout door and knotted it at both ends, because he had learned what a man forgets in a whiteout. Then he fed the stove and sat and listened to the sandhills disappear. The storm blew 2 days. Sometime in the black hours of the 2nd night, Ezra came awake with his heart going and did not know why. He lay still. The wind was down to a mutter. Then he heard it, a hoof, dragging, not walking, dragging and stopping and dragging again. He lit the lantern and pushed the door out against the drift. The snow had stopped. The air was so cold it had a taste. Out on the flat, moving slow, was a horse. She was coming from the north, and she was coming crooked. And even at 40 yards he could see that she was starving. Her hip bones stood up like tent poles. Her winter coat was long and matted and rimed white along the belly. Ezra started toward her and then stopped because she had not turned her head. The lantern was the only light in 10 miles. Every animal alive turns toward a light. She went past it at 30 feet without a flicker of her ears, walking with her nose down and her neck swinging like a slow pendulum, sweeping the ground. She was blind. She walked out, onto the flat, into the bare place where nothing grew, and she stopped. She stood square. She put her nose down into the snow over the broken stone, and she blew out once, and then she just stood there. Ezra had been raised around stock and had never in his life seen anything like it. Not a horse hunting shelter, not a horse hunting feed. A horse arriving. He came up slow, talking the whole way, letting his boots crunch so she could place him. Easy, easy. Now. Her head came around. He saw her eyes then and had to look away and make himself look back. Both were ruined, not filmed over with age. Scarred. The lids were thickened and drawn, and the hair around them had come back in white and grew in whorls, the way hair grows back over a burn. She let him touch her. That was the thing that took the legs out from under him. She did not startle. She did not swing away. She let a stranger put a hand on her neck in the dark, because she had already decided about him, or because she was too far gone to care, and he never afterward knew which. Under the mats he could feel her. She was a big mare, 16 hands, and once she had been something. "Come on," he said. "Come on, girl. There's nothing here." She would not move. He stood beside her in the snow for the better part of an hour. He talked to her about harness. He told her about a hame strap he'd sewn wrong in '81 and had to cut apart. He told her his wife's name. At some point, without any change he could see, she gave it up. Her head came around and she pushed her forehead flat against his shoulder and held it there, leaning, taking his shape into whatever picture she was making of the world. Then she followed him, not on a lead. She followed the sound of his boots, one length back, her nose almost at his elbow, and when he stopped, she stopped. He got her into the lean-to and hung his coat over her withers and gave her a double handful of the beans' cooking water with the salt in it, because it was warm, and then a very little hay. Toward morning she lay down. Ezra sat in the straw with his back against the sod wall and did not sleep. Whatever she had come for was out there under the stone, and she had walked 100 miles in the dark to stand on top of it. Abner Fitch had been shoeing horses in that country since before the war, and he had one hand. The other one was a hook and a leather cuff, and he could do more with the hook than most men could do with fingers. He came out to Ezra's the 3rd week of December on a rented horse because Ezra had sent word by the mail carrier and had said in 6 words that he had something Abner ought to see. Abner walked around the mare twice without speaking. He ran his hook lightly down her shoulder and she didn't flinch, and he grunted, and Ezra understood that he had just learned something about the mare's character. How much you feeding her? 6 times a day. Little bits, keep doing that. Abner lifted her lip, looked at her gums, laid his ear against her barrel and listened a long while. She's 40 pounds shy of dead. Somebody's been running her off feed all fall. She came in on her own. I don't doubt it. Abner straightened. Bring the lamp. He worked his fingers back through the winter coat on her left hip, parting it, and held the lamp close. There was a brand there. Ezra had seen it and had taken it for a half moon, which was Vernon Prentice's mark and was burned into 1/3 of the stock in that county. Abner didn't say anything for a while. That's 2 brands, he said finally. It's a half moon. It's a half moon burned on top of a bell. Abner turned the lamp so the light raked across the hide. See there, the bell's older. See how the hair's laid down different. A brand only scars once. You burn a second time over the same hide, you get that. He tapped with the tip of the hook. That's a burn on a burn. Whoever did it wasn't good at it, or wasn't sober. Ezra stood very still. Temperance Ivy rang a bell, he said. She did. She's dead. She is. Abner set the lamp down. Now come look at this and don't get sick on me. He went to the mare's head. He put his hand under her jaw and turned her face gently toward the light, and he showed Ezra the scarring around the eyes, the way it ran in 2 clean arcs, the same on both sides, high on the bone. You know what quicklime does to hide. I know what it does. This wasn't sickness, Abe said. This wasn't wire, and it wasn't a fall, and it wasn't any horse's fault. Somebody held her head, and somebody else did this to her. He let go of her jaw and stepped back and wiped his hand on his trousers, though there was nothing on it. And they didn't kill her after. That's the part I can't get past. You'd think a man who'd do that would finish it. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe. Abner looked at the mare. She had turned her head toward the sound of their voices, and her ears were forward, and she was waiting, politely, the way a horse waits. Or maybe he wanted her turned out where folks could see her. Wanted her walking around as a thing nobody'd want. Ezra thought about her going past his lantern. Straight past it. She's not lost, he said. She's never once been lost since she got here. She goes out to that flat every day and stands in the same spot, and I have to go get her. Abner looked at him. What's out on the flat? Stone. Broken stone under about 8 inches of sand. Sharp stone. The old man was quiet a long moment. Sharp, he said. Corners on it. Abner Fitch picked up his lamp and blew it out and stood in the gray light of the lean-to door. Mister, he said, I've knowed one horse in my life that could find her way home blind, and she was foaled on the place she found. He settled his hat. You be careful who you tell that to. Ezra named her Frostmane that week, for the ice that had crusted her forelock the night she came. and because a thing that has been made nameless on purpose ought to be given one back. By January, she could hold her weight through a currying. By February, she'd learned the yard. 9 steps from lean-to-door to woodpile, 22 to the dugout, and she walked it with her ears swiveling like a lookout's. She still went out to the flat. Every clear day. She stood on the bare stone with her head down and did not paw, did not graze, only stood, the way people stand at a grave. And every time, coming back, her legs to the knee were black. Ezra noticed it in February. He knelt and scraped some off and rolled it between his fingers, and it was not sand and not snowmelt. It was gray-black mud with a white bloom drying on it, alkali, the kind of muck a horse picks up, crossing seep ground. There was no seep ground on that quarter section. There was no seep ground within 4 miles. He sat back on his heels with the mud on his fingers and his heart going hard, and he began to be afraid, because he had begun to understand. Sparrow Bluff had one laundry, run behind the hotel, and the woman who ran it did not look up when men came in. Lorna Ashby was 31. She had a straight back and reddened hands, and she wore her hair pinned so tight it must have hurt. She had been in that town 2 years, and had spoken maybe 100 sentences in it, because she had learned what happened when she spoke. Ezra brought her a shirt with a torn sleeve in March, and she took it and wrote the number on a slip and gave him half. "You're the one bought the Ivy place," she said. "I am." She looked up then. She had gray eyes, and she used them like a woman checking a road behind her. "Is she alive?" Ezra set the slip down on the counter and did not touch it. "Who?" he said carefully. "The bell mare." The room was full of steam and the smell of lye. Somewhere behind the curtain a copper boiler was knocking. "She's alive," he said. "She came in out of the December storm. She's blind." Lorna Ashby put both hands flat on the counter, and her chin went up, and she cried without any sound at all and without ever once closing her eyes. She did it the way people cry when they have taught themselves to do it in front of other people, and Ezra Dunmore stood there and understood that he had walked into somebody's whole life. "I saw it done," she said. He did not say anything. "I was hired at the Half Moon in '87. Stable, not house. My father was a horse doctor in Rock County, and I know more about a leg than any man on that place, which was the trouble." She wiped her face with the heel of her hand once, and then she was done. "Prentice bought that mare out of the Ivy estate sale. Widowed raised her from a foal on that quarter. Bell brand, he burned over it. He burned over it in November of '87, after she got loose the 4th time." Lorna's voice did not rise. It flattened. Every time she got out of that corral she went the same way. Straight west 31 miles to the Ivy place, and every time we brought her back she had black mud to the knee. Ezra put his hand on the counter to steady himself. "There's no water on that quarter," he said. "There's the best water in the county on that quarter." She looked at him. Temperance Ivy's well ran 40 gallons a minute in the dry of '86. Prentice offered her $900 for 160 acres of sand, and everybody in the county thought he was a fool, and she wouldn't sell. He owns every section around it. Everyone. He runs 1,100 head, and he waters them off 2 shallow wells and a creek that quits in August. She died. She died in February of '88, and the land sat in probate and the taxes went unpaid. Lorna's hands had begun to shake now, and she put them out of sight below the counter. In November of that year, Gideon Dorn, he's Prentice's foreman, took 8 men and 4 wagons out there for 11 days. I saw the freight bill. 41 loads of fieldstone hauled from the Niobrara breaks. They pulled the cribbing and they filled the well and they piled the stone in and covered it with sand, so it would go to tax sale dead. Ezra thought of the flat, corners on it. So he could buy it for nothing, he said. So he could buy it for nothing and open it back up in a year and never say a word. She let out a breath, but the mare kept going home, and she'd come back with wet mud on her, and Dorn's own men saw it every time, and a man who's just spent 11 days telling the county there's no water out there can't have a horse walking into the yard with the proof drying on her legs. She stopped. "Go on," Ezra said. I found them in the little corral behind the smithy. Dorn had her snubbed to a post. There was a bucket. Lorna Ashby looked at the wall behind Ezra's shoulder. I got there in the middle of it. I put myself between them and I got hit for it, and I went to the sheriff the next morning, and I told him. And by the time I got back to the Half Moon, a colt worth $600 was dead in his stall, and there was a bottle of blue vitriol in my chest under my father's tally book. And 11 men swore they'd seen me in the barn that night. Her mouth moved. It was not a smile. Prentice didn't press it. That's what he told the sheriff. He said he'd be merciful. He said I should just go. The boiler knocked behind the curtain. So I went, Lorna said, and he turned her out blind on the sandhills in December because there's no crime in that. And I have washed shirts in this town for 2 years, and every man who brings me one knows what I am, and none of them know a thing. Ezra picked up the slip of paper and folded it and put it in his vest next to the thimble. Miss Ashby, he said, I've got a mare that needs a horse doctor, and I can't pay much. She lifted her head. I don't want your charity. It isn't charity. It's $4 a month, and it's less than you're worth. He put his hat on. Bring the tally book. For the first time in 2 years, Lorna Ashby did not lower her eyes. Vernon Prentice came out on the 11th of April in a buggy with Gideon Dorn riding alongside. Ezra was in the yard splitting cedar. Lorna was at the mare's near hind, holding a hoof between her knees, and she straightened when she heard the wheels, and she went white, and then she went still, and Ezra saw her make the decision not to go inside. Prentice got down. He was a trim man of 60 with a clean collar out here, where there was no reason on earth for a clean collar. Dunmore. He looked past Ezra at the mare. That's my stock. She's got a bell under that Half Moon, Ezra said. Prentice's eyes came back. Something moved behind them and then was put away. That's Half Moon stock, purchased at estate sale. Papers in my safe. She went missing off my winter range in December. I'll take her now, and I'll pay you $8 for the feed. Frostmane had turned her head at the voice. Her ears flattened back against her skull and stayed there. Look at her, Lorna said. Prentice did not. You're keeping a thief on the place, Dunmore. I'd hoped better of you. You'd hoped nothing of me, Ezra said. You never once looked at me till I put $60 on your water. For a moment, nobody said anything. Out on the flat, a meadowlark was going, over and over. Dorn shifted in his saddle. He was 35 wide, and he was watching the mare the way a man watches a dog that has bitten him once. She's blind, Dorn said. She's no use to anybody. Blind stock has one use, Prentice said mildly, and you've interrupted it. Ezra set the axe down in the block. He did it slowly. Mr. Prentice, he said, you hauled 41 loads of stone 30 miles to make a piece of ground worthless. Then you sat on the courthouse steps and let a boy make a joke about it, and I don't believe you ever once considered that the animal you paid $900 for would keep walking back and telling on you. Prentice's face did not change. That was the frightening thing. It simply closed like a ledger. The sheriff will be out, he said. Have her haltered. He got into his buggy. Dorn turned his horse and let it drift past the lean-to, close, and Frostmane threw her head and backed into the wall so hard the sod cracked. They went. The dust hung a long time. Sheriff Milo Deering rode out 2 days later with his hat in his hands, and questions he didn't enjoy asking. He looked at the brand for 11 minutes. He looked at the eyes for less than that. And then he went and stood by his horse for a while, with his back turned. Mr. Prentice has papers, he said when he came back. You've got a story. We've got a tally book, Lorna said. And you've got a name in this county, Miss Ashby, and it isn't a good one. The sheriff said it without cruelty, which somehow made it worse. County court sits the 4th of May. Until then, the mare stays put and nobody touches her. Anybody comes on this place, you send for me. He mounted up. For what it's worth, he said, looking out at the flat. I never did believe that well went dry all in one night. The 3rd of May, the night before the hearing, the wind came out of the southwest and it rained, which almost never happens on the sand hills in a useful amount. Ezra woke at 2 to the mare screaming. He got the door open with the lantern in his hand, and there was a man in the lean-to, and the mare was up and swinging, blind and terrified, throwing herself at a wall she could not see. The man went out the back with his coat over his head. There was a horse waiting, and it was gone into the dark before Ezra cleared the corner. The gate stood open. Frostmane was gone. They looked all night. Lorna rode Copperhead, and Ezra walked with the lantern, calling, and the rain came in bursts and quit and came again. Twice Ezra stopped and stood with his hands on his knees and thought about a woman sitting down in the snow 1.5 miles from help, facing east. "I wasn't there," he said to the dark. "Ezra." Lorna's voice came out of the black. "Ezra, she's not lost." He raised his head. "She's never been lost," Lorna said. "Not once in her life. Where does she go?" They came out onto the flat as the sky was going gray in the east. Frostmane stood in the middle of the bare stone with her head down and the rain running off her. She was shaking all over. Her chest was cut where she'd gone through the gate. She had not moved from the spot. Her legs were black to the knee. Lorna got down and went to her and put her forehead against the mare's forehead and held it there. Ezra knelt in the sand. He dug with both hands and got down to the rock and pulled up a piece of limestone with the corners still on it, and the hollow under it was full of water. Not rain. The rain had barely wet the dust. This was cold, and it came up around his wrists, and it kept coming, and it smelled the way water smells 40 feet down, and the sand around it had gone the same gray-black as the mud on her legs. He looked up at the mare standing over him in the rain. "She knows the way," he said. The county courtroom in Sparrow Bluff was a converted Grange hall with a stove in the middle and 80 people in it. By 9 o'clock, which was more people than lived in Sparrow Bluff. Prentice's lawyer went first. He was from Grand Island, and he was good. He spoke about property and about how a man's stock does not stop being his stock because it wanders, and about the sad case of a woman with a history who had attached herself to a lonely man's charity. He never said Lorna's name. He said the laundress 4 times. Then Vernon Prentice took the stand and said, in a voice full of regret, that he had done everything he could for the animal, and that her injuries were a mystery to him, and that he had not personally overseen work on the Ivy Quarter and did not know the particulars. Judge Ordway made a note. Lorna went up next. She had washed her one good dress and pressed it, and she stood there with her father's tally book in her hands, and Ezra watched the whole room decide about her before she opened her mouth. The lawyer asked her about the colt. He asked her about the blue vitriol. He asked her whether it was true she had been discharged for theft, and she said yes, and the room made its sound. Then why? The lawyer said pleasantly, "Should this court believe one word you say?" Lorna looked down at the book in her hands. "Because I wrote it all down before I knew any of it mattered," she said. She opened the tally book. She read out the date the mare came onto the half-moon place, and the date of each of the 4 times she broke out, and the condition of her feet and legs on each return, entered in her own hand at the time, in a barn, at night, by a girl who had been raised to keep a record. Alkali mud, 4 legs to knee, fresh. She read it 4 times. She read the entry for the 22nd of November, 1887, which said only, "Bell mare snubbed, near corral, Dorn. I could not stop it." Then she closed the book and set it on the rail. "He didn't blind her to be cruel," she said. "Cruelty would have been quicker. He blinded her because she was the only witness that walked." "Object," said the lawyer. "Sit down," said Judge Ordway. Abner Fitch testified about a burn laid over a burn, and about quicklime, and about what he had seen in his 51 years, and the courtroom listened to him, because they had all had their horses shod by him. And then, at 2:30, a 19-year-old with a bad haircut stood up in the back of the room and said, "Your Honor, I hauled the stone." Toby Russ came up the aisle with his hat crushed in his fist. He would not look at Prentice. 11 days, he said. 41 loads out of the Niobrara breaks. Mr. Dorn paid us $1.50 a day and told us it was for a stock dam. There wasn't any dam. We pulled the cribbing out of that well by hand and we filled it. I was 17. His mouth worked. I sat on that rail last October and I laughed at that man for buying it, and I knew. I've knowed the whole time. The courtroom did not make a sound. Why now, son? The judge asked. Toby looked at the floor. Because she come back, he said. Blind, 31 miles, and I couldn't hold it no more. The freight bills came in after that, subpoenaed from the drayage company at Valentine, and they said what Lorna had said they would say in a bookkeeper's tidy hand. Prentice's lawyer asked for a recess. Judge Ordway said he did not require one. He said the Mare would remain with Ezra Dunmore. He said the brand had been altered, and that this was a matter for the county attorney and a grand jury, and he named Gideon Dorn in the same breath and had him held. He said, looking at Lorna over his spectacles, that in his judgment no charge had ever been properly brought against Miss Lorna Ashby, and that the record of this court would show it, and that she should have that in writing before she left the building. Then he said one more thing, mostly to himself while he was gathering his papers. That horse walked 31 miles to say what nobody else in this county would. The gavel came down. Ezra found he had taken Lorna's hand at some point and did not know when. She did not take it back. Vernon Prentice walked out of the Grange Hall first, upright, and the crowd opened for him and kept opening. Nobody spoke to him. Nobody spat either. The men he had loaned money to looked at their boots. Old Ephraim Tull, who had ridden for the Half Moon 20 years, stood up as Prentice passed and turned his whole body away and sat back down. By August, his contracts had unwound and his syndicate had found other pastures. And in the fall he sold out and went east, and no man in Sparrow Bluff shook his hand at the depot. Nobody apologized to Ezra Dunmore. That wasn't how it was done there. Instead, a wagon came out to his place the week after the hearing, unannounced, and left 30 cedar posts inside the gate. The following Tuesday there was a coil of new rope hanging on the lean-to door, and a can of kerosene, and no note. Ephraim Tull rode out and stood around for an hour, and finally said he had some hay that was going to spoil anyway, if Ezra wanted the trouble of hauling it. Toby Russ came out on foot and asked for work and would not take wages for the first month. Lorna watched it happen from the dugout door with her arms crossed. They follow whoever's winning, she said. Ezra thought about it. They follow what's proved, he said. It's not the same thing, but it'll hold weight. They dug the well out that summer, and it was the hardest work either of them ever did. There was no drill in Sheridan County and none needed. It was a hand-dug well, the way every good well in that country was dug. A man on a rope in the dark with a bucket, and a man on the windlass up top and a third man to spell them both. Abner Fitch rigged the tripod and ran the windlass with his hook. Toby went down first because he was youngest and had the most to make up for. Ezra went down after because he wasn't going to send a boy anywhere he wouldn't go. They pulled out the stone Vernon Prentice had hauled 30 miles, one bucket at a time. 41 loads going in on wagons. Coming out, it was 111 days of a man's back. 19 feet down they found the cottonwood cribbing where Dorn's crew had cut it off. It had gone black and hard as iron. Below it the shaft was clean. At 38 feet the sand at the bottom of the bucket came up wet. At 41 feet Toby Rusk yelled something that nobody up top could make out, and then they heard him laughing, and then they hauled him up sitting in the bucket with his boots full. The water came in cold and gray and cleared inside a week. Frostmane was standing at the edge of the flat when they broke through. She had stood there most of the summer, on the days it was cool enough, in the shade of the tarp they rigged for her. Lorna led her forward, and she went down on her knees the way an old horse does, and put her nose into the trough and drank for a long time. Nobody said anything at all. Toby Rusk sat in the sand with his hands over his face. Ezra took the thimble out of his vest and turned it over. The little worn-through place caught the light. He'd carried it 18 months as an accusation. He stood there in the wet sand and understood finally that it wasn't one. It was just a thing that had been used all the way up by somebody who did not stop. He put it back in his pocket. Lorna was standing beside the trough with her hand on the mare's neck, and she was watching him, and her face had that carefulness on it that she had worn every day of the 2 years she washed shirts in that town. "I've got a hole in the ground with water in it," Ezra said. "No house, a dugout with a bad roof and a mule that bites. I know what you've got. I'd like you to stay anyway." Lorna Ashby looked out across the flat at the grass, at the light going long and gold over the hills, at the wet dark ring spreading in the sand around the trough where no water had come up in 2 years. "Yes," she said. "They put up an air motor windmill the next spring, freighted out from Chicago in crates, and its steel tail carried the name in red letters that faded in 5 summers to nothing. It made a sound turning that they both stopped hearing after a while and then noticed again, sometimes, at night, and were glad of. The grass came back on the flat, and then it came back thicker than the country around it, because the ground there had never actually been dead. It had only been buried. Ezra Dunmore ran horses on that quarter for 31 years, and the county came to him for stock and paid what he asked. Lorna doctored every animal within 20 miles and half the children besides, and she kept a tally book on every one of them in her own hand at the time. Frostmane lived 9 more years. She never regained her sight, and she never once got lost. She learned the whole place by walking it, and the mares in that pasture would follow a blind horse anywhere, and Ezra never could explain it to anybody who hadn't seen it. They buried her on the flat, near the well, in the ground she had come home to. Toby Rusk married a girl from Rushville, and every year on the 9th of December, no matter the weather, he rode out to Ezra's and sat by the stove and didn't say much. The country changed. Wire went up. The railroad came through, then went away again. The men who had laughed on the courthouse steps died, and their sons learned the story wrong, and their grandsons learned it right again from an old woman with a straight back, who was still washing her own shirts at 80. And when strangers asked how anybody had ever known there was water on a piece of ground the whole county swore was dry, they were told the truth, which was better than anything anybody could have made up. A blind mare came out of a blizzard, walked past a lantern without turning her head, and stood where the well had been. What the world buries, something living remembers.